possession of a greatly enhanced will, but that the mind itself, all the faculties comprised in the ego, previously so troublesome and lacking in concentration, has gradually, because of the dynamic will and these various disciplines, has been placed under control. And in this way, the student becomes enabled to fulfill the terms of what James so eloquently wrote. We apply the necessary stimulus, and there we find in all their completeness these definite types of consciousness which must play an enormous role in the future evolution of mankind. The gods of Egypt. The Egyptians, like most primitive peoples, were polytheists. Their pantheon was very extensive. We must not fall into the serious error of equating primitive with stupid. On the contrary, the state of Egyptian art, architecture, and astronomy indicate a high degree of intellectual attainment. We are forced to the assumption, then, that there must be more to their polytheism than at first meets the eye. Primitive man did not create the gods, as think so many modern students of comparative religion, who are destitute of all sympathy and religious genius. What primitive man really did, perhaps unconsciously, was to apply names and quasi-human faculties to these powers or great forces of nature, which he so accurately observed, and which he believed rightly enough to be manifestations or symbols of the divine. All the thoughts and ideas, all the great learning and knowledge of the Egyptians found their pictorial expression in allegory, parable, and painting. The evidence presents itself simply that these many Egyptian gods, all symbolic of the various creative aspects of divinity, are emergence from a ground of being or Godhead, which perhaps the average person in earlier days could never have conceived, but which was tacitly assumed by the priestly class. The famous Egyptologist Wallace Burge confirms this idea, stating, "The learned understood the meaning of symbols and paid their adorations through them to the truths of which they were the coverings." This is not dissimilar to the lofty abstract mysticism of Meister Eckhart, which could hardly have been appreciated by, for example, a 13th century German or Italian peasant, who angrily might place an image of a saint in a dark cupboard for not having fulfilled the supplicant's wish or prayer. At the head of the Egyptian pantheon soars a god who is one, immortal, uncreated, invisible, and hidden in the inaccessible depths of his essence. So wrote Dr. Marriott Bay in his description of the principal monuments at the Egyptian Museum at Bulak in Cairo. And he continued, "This God is the creator of the heavens and of the earth. He has made everything which exists, and nothing has been made without him. Such is the God who is reserved for the initiated of the sanctuary." Most of the great Egyptian scholars recognized all the gods of all the pantheons as phases or aspects of this great God. Their religion and their gods must not be judged by the standard of the religion and gods of any later civilized nation. We can only know what the Egyptians thought and believed by reading and studying the texts which they wrote. And a final opinion on their beliefs cannot be obtained until all their religious religious literature has been published. And Wallace Budge went on to say, the general outline, however, of their religion is clear enough, and it shows us that they possessed a good, practical form of monotheism and a belief in immortality, which were already extremely ancient, even in the days when the pyramids were built. But an abstract, impersonal God is far too vague and nebulous, and altogether unsuited to the layman's needs and comprehensions. It is too far removed from his concrete life here and now. So man needs a more intimate, personal deity to whom he can relate himself in a meaningful way. As he himself grows emotionally and spiritually, he can discard some of the narrow forms that previously meant so much to him. As to which one of these gods a man originally selects, this has as much to do with temperament and basic character as it has with training and conditioning. A soldier or an aggressive personality would find the worship of Horus, who presides over war, more suited to his structure, while a sculptor or a poet would certainly feel nearer to Hathor, who is the patron god of the arts. One person may need a warm, loving mother like Isis. Another may need to feel watched over by a stern, testy senior such as Horus. We may consider the Egyptian gods under two broad categories. First, as personifications of the vast creative forces of the universe, and secondly, since man is the microcosm of the macrocosm, as primitive archetypes within the depths of the unconscious psyche. In fact, Dr. Jung has laid down the proposition that since the primordial archetypes function within the unconscious depths of the human psyche, as the gods of olden times were said to have behaved, we might just as well call them gods, for their function is at all times inviolable, immutable, and consistent. That man was fashioned by the gods in the same manner, or on the same pattern as the cosmos itself, of which he is a part, was implicit in all Egyptian religious belief. Throughout many of the rituals in the Egyptian religious texts, many resemblances are made between the anatomies of various of the gods and of man himself. For example, the individual parts of man were placed under the protection of, or better still, were identified with a god or goddess. His hair was said to be the hair of Nui, the sky goddess. His face that of Atum, the solar disk. The eyes, those of Hathor. His belly and back, those of Sekhet. His phallus, that of Ra, the creative god, and so on. In this way, he could truthfully exclaim, "There is no member of my body which is not a member of the gods." This therefore gave the Egyptian a supreme awareness of the divinity of his body itself. There was no part shameful, no physiological function unclean, for in him and in his every part there was ample evidence of a divine, time-transcending order. Each god in the Egyptian myth had a precise, well-defined function to perform in the cosmos, creative, preservative, or destructive as the case may be. And that function had been accurately ascertained by observation, both secular and religious, carried out over a long period of time, and the qualities and nature of the god were expressed in pictures. That the Egyptians conceived Ra, the sun god, to exist actually in such a conventional art form as that in which they painted him, I must not be construed as believing, nor that they considered the sun at midnight to assume the form of a beetle. What they actually did believe was that the symbol of the scarab expressed in various subtle ways the nature of the sun after the hour of setting at midnight. The cow, likewise, was a symbol of exuberant fertility. The ibis, a god of wisdom and supreme intelligence. The hawk, by reason of its ability to remain poised in the sky, was a perfect symbol of the divine self, which, detached from all things of earth and form, looks down upon them with the eye of equanimity. When Christianity developed later, there was a gradual absorption of some of the contents of the older religions. They were absorbed without too much difficulty. It is recognized by many scholars that some of the characteristics of Isis, for example, were attributed to Mary. Some of those of Osiris, the resurrection god, were similar to those relative to Christ. And many of the other gods were either attributed to the archangels and angels of tradition or embodied in the virtues and character